This is our second of our 12-part series for business leaders, and we're super excited to have Steve as part of the conversation this morning. Steve is the co-founder of Expect Success Global. Steve has over 10,000 coaching sessions underneath his belt. He's earned a reputation as America's breakthrough coach, helping entrepreneurs unlock their full potential. Steve has owned and managed manufacturing companies. He's consistently been a top producer in high-level sales organizations, and he's also built expertise in real estate investing and digital marketing. So super excited to have you as part of the conversation, talking about helping organizations that are in their growth stage and are scaling up. So thanks for being a part of the conversation today, Steve.
Well, Zach, you know what? I am excited for one reason, well, for lots of reasons. I'm always excited, but really to be on here with you. And some of you may or may not know, but I've known Zach for several years. I work with him intimately, and Zach is a man of integrity and just very intelligent, thinks things through, someone that is the exception. So to be asked by you, Zach, to join you, I just want to let you know it is a privilege.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate the kind words. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Scaling can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. According to your definition of scaling, what does that term even mean?
Well, scaling means growing your business. And that's really the long and short of it. But scaling means when you're going to grow very quickly, not just, we all want our business to grow, but go from a certain point to massive increase over a short period of time. That's what I think about.
What are some of the misconceptions that maybe leaders of organizations have around scaling?
Well, sometimes they think it's just an event in time, or there's one or two things that need to be in place, when quite frankly, it's everything. You've got to look at the whole global business, and you have to look at everything that's going on before you really should scale, or even know if you can scale. So a lot of people think it's a point in time, but it's not. It's really everything. It's
good. What are some of the common challenges that businesses face whenever they start going down the scale or growth route?
That's kind of a loaded question, Zach. Every company is different. And I've seen people that don't have the revenue streams in place, or customer acquisition cost. I know other people that have lots of business and it's coming in, but they're not profitable. They don't have a net profit. So it's really looking at what is that particular organization, that company lacking. And it's like a puzzle, figuring out what pieces are they missing. But there's a lot of things, some of the things I just said, but it could be a wide range of things. So I don't know if there's one common theme, but you have to look at everything and figure out what is missing so they can scale.
Yeah. As you think about your over 10,000 paid coaching sessions, and obviously being an entrepreneur that's led organizations before, can you think of maybe an example of a company that you've seen do scaling right? Because it seems like there's a lot of things that can go wrong whenever you start going down the route of hiring and adding additional capacity, and you're adding new complexities to the organization. Can you think of an example from your experience where you've seen somebody execute on that really well?
Absolutely. I was working with a company, and they were doing about 4 million in sales, and we took that company in a fairly short period of time, over just a couple of years, up to about 30 million in sales, a little more than that. But what they did right is they put the right people in place. That's one of the major things. You have to have the right people. But then we also had to look at standard operating procedures, and because you can't scale if you don't have everything kind of mapped out. How do you keep producing the same things over and over? So with this company, we also looked at the people they brought on. How do you pay them? So we had to really redesign their pay plans for their key employees, and looking at it going, you're paying too much, or there's not enough incentive there for them to actually grow and be profitable. So again, with that company though, step by step over a couple year, maybe 3-year period, we grew the company, but it was taking it step by step and not just trying to, wing it and just do it overnight.
Yeah, one of the challenges that I felt in is my journey as an entrepreneur is trying to forecast around the growth curve. Here's how I think that we're going to be growing in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, while at the same time not getting stuck, being complacent with where we're at. And so can you, I guess, kind of walk us through, how do you, as an entrepreneur or as a leader of an organization, how do you walk that tightrope, where you're balancing between growing too fast and potentially adding additional capacity, that maybe the organization doesn't need, while at the same time not being so slow to where you're constantly making decisions that are reactive. So how do you, I guess, build a framework for making those decisions?
Well, again, it's going to be different with every organization, but what you want to look at is that type, and you said it very well, it's a tightrope sometimes, but you have to be prepared. And I know as a young entrepreneur, I didn't look ahead far enough. So you have to look at, if I do grow, do I have enough money in place, or can I get the money? Is it sitting there? Do I have lines of credit and all of that? But then also it's, again, the right people, because you can have all the money in the world, but people are the solution and people are the problem. So do you have the right people that can help you as you go through that? And once you think you have enough in place, and I don't think most entrepreneurs wait until they get everything in place, because we're not entrepreneurs. If we're like, everything's got to be perfect, you're not going to really grow. So it's getting enough in place, maybe 70, 75, 80%. And then you pull the trigger on the next thing, but then you nail it down. It's like everything from your sales and your marketing, and I'll just use sales as a for instance. What's your closing ratio? If you're bringing all these leads in, are you tracking and improving with your sales staff? Or, the cost of acquisition to even get those leads, how much is that costing? So it's making sure all that is in place, and, just so many other things. But the tightrope financially is going, are we close enough there that we can pull the trigger? And then when it is tightrope, sometimes you make adjustments. Like for the first 6 months, you're going to pay people in one way, but when you reach stability, maybe you're going to give them a higher base and less commission, or whatever that might be, or vice versa. But it's trying to figure out, again, that puzzle of how can we grow without just going out and borrowing all the money in the world.
Yeah, it's good. Can you think of examples? And I know that I can think of more than a few where you've seen, leaders maybe get a little bit too ambitious with their growth plans and try to take on too much.
Oh, what a great question. I'll tell you, there's one organization that comes to mind. I was working with this gentleman, and he hired me as a consultant, helped him really increase his sales because he really needed that. And a great leader, everyone loves him, but we quit working together, but he kept implementing everything, and they grew so quickly. They massively had all this business coming in. It was crazy. And then he reached back out to me and said, help. And he was dropping F-bombs all the time. He was so stressed because they had so much income. It's like, how do I keep up with, or not just income, but customers? How do I keep up with everything that goes with that? So, that's one, for instance. And we just had to go back to the basics and say, let's put the people in place now. You should have had them before, but you didn't. You focused on sell. And it's painful if you don't do it in the beginning. Now, he survived and went through that, but it's not fun, and it's very expensive if you do it after the fact.
Sure. Yeah, that's really good. It seems like most entrepreneurs don't wake up getting very excited to think about standard operating procedures and putting putting policy, into place to make sure that there's a reproducible process. And somebody that comes to mind for me is, I was working with a blue collar business owner. They were doing about $700,000. They decided that, hey, we want to really mash on the gas pedal, and so the two owners decided that they were just going to go on a hiring spree. And over the course of about 12 months, they ended up hiring and firing 30 different individuals. They started the year with the two owners. They ended the year with the two owners. And they grew top line from maybe 700 to 1.2, 1.3 they made less money than they did when they were a smaller organization, and they really didn't have anything to show for it. And so I got kind of brought along for the ride to see how things were going. And the good news is we implemented in the past year, that was 2023, where they were, let's say, trying to scale up in an unhealthy way. We spent a lot of 2024 just kind of rebuilding the organization, building a lot more standard operating procedures, building a good firm foundation for them to stand on top of. And so they now have a lot better baseline. We've built a lot of professionals, around them, whether that be attorneys or bankers or CPAs. We've tried to get a lot of stuff off of their plate that just quite frankly was not the best and highest use of their time. So, that's an example of somebody that I have seen. There's been a couple of other owners that we've worked with over the years that have just maybe bit off a little bit more than they can chew. Can you think of, I guess, any examples from your experience where you've seen, let's say, an owner on the other end of the spectrum where they weren't forecasting the growth, and they were, let's say, doing really well, but maybe there was some hesitancy or some anxiety or some fear around making those next couple of hires. I know a handful of people who are solopreneurs, and they're getting to that stage where they're thinking about making that first hire, and man, it's a big one and it's scary. So can you think of any examples on the other end of the spectrum where organization leaders are too slow to add additional capacity, and maybe some of the downsides of waiting too long to make some of those decisions?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think that's very common with solopreneurs is at first, and I did the same thing. I can say it when I first went into business. You do everything yourself and no one can do it as good as you. And you work around the clock and you know everything about your business. But sooner or later, you get to a point and you say, I can't do anymore. And I think that's normal, what you just described. So it's kind of, again, when you get to the point that you don't have enough balance in your own life, you don't like the quality of life, or you just want to scale and grow, you need to do that. But I think I can think of dozens of times, and one person I'm thinking of right now, they were actually they were in sales, and they were doing real estate sales, and quite frankly, they hit their max, and they were doing pretty well. They were in the low to mid six-figure income, so making several $100,000 a year, but that was it. They could do no more, and they had no life. So again, then you have to take a step back and say, let's give up a lot of that revenue, or at least some of it, to get assistants in place, to get people doing your marketing for you, outsourcing or hiring someone full-time to do some of it. And that's a whole discussion of its own. But yeah, I think it's very common. This person eventually had a life. They ended up being able to go, wow, I can make the same amount of money. And they didn't make much more money, but now they had such a quality of life. And so I think that's just as important as making money.
Yeah, that's great. As you were kind of sharing that example, I was thinking, and I'm going to put my nerdy finance hat on for just a second. As anybody who knows me will know that I always have to use some Excel spreadsheet examples. But I've looked at a lot of data for organizations in the financial services world, and generally what you see is within the first 3 years. Firm owners, they start off with very small amount of revenue in their first year, like not even survival rates. And then they go to their second year, and they end up basically doubling what they did in their first year. But then what's really surprising is when they go from year 2 to year 3, there's a very, very small incremental gain. And, if you look at that, and let's say, you've never run a business before, it's you're in your first couple of years of business, you would go, well, why in the world did they have such a big jump from year 1 to year 2? And then they had such a small jump from year 2 to year 3. And as you start to, have conversations, especially in our industry where you can do a lot of stuff by yourself, what you find is that as these firm owners are taking on more clients and they're doing all the work, at a certain point in time, you now have to service all of these clients that you're responsible for taking care of. and you just don't have time to go out there and keep on bringing in, new clients anymore, and you just start working more and more and more. But what's really interesting is that between year 3 and year 4, they actually end up growing more in between year 3 and year 4 than they did the previous 3 years combined together. And I think it's to your point, they start building systems, they start being able to delegate and add some capacity to the team. And then that's whenever, in our industry, like things really start to go parabolic, and firm owners start doing really well and let's say year 4 or 5. So I'm just kind of curious with that example. Is there any overlay for different industries? Because I know that you're industry agnostic. You don't work with one specific industry. So has that been kind of your experience seeing similar type of bottlenecks, or is that just specific to my world?
No, I think that's really generic, because people are people and companies grow the same way. It's just, and a lot of people, I don't care whether it's a marketing company, it doesn't really matter what it is. The reality is, we're solopreneurs usually, not always, but then when you grow, that's not even a business. And some people don't understand that, but that's a really good high paid job. And when I first started in coaching years ago, I was a high paid coach. I made a lot of money just helping other people, but that's not a company. You run out of time, and how much can you grow? So you start hiring people, and then pretty soon you put everything. So it's every business. It's my business. It's yours. It's doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, that's good. Why don't we shift gears a little bit, and let's you mentioned 2 things whenever you were explaining some of the challenges that come with scaling. What I heard was maybe one of the lenses that we have to really focus in on is the financial lens. Obviously, it takes resources to add capacity and to leverage technology and do a lot of these things that are really fun as part of building a business. And then the second one, which we'll get to in a second, was talking a little bit more about operationally creating procedures, so that way, as you're taking some of these hats off and you're delegating them, you have kind of a playbook that you can hand over to other people on the team. So why don't we spend a little bit of time talking about some of the financial strategies that scaling organization leaders can put into place? What's a framework for how they should approach making some of these decisions? The first one that comes to mind for me, because I've just seen it a lot of times, and I'm sure that you have too. It generally revolves around adding more capacity in the organization in the form of more employees, and those tend to be really big decisions. So can you just kind of walk through foundationally, how do you approach, or how do you think about leveraging financial resources for a scaling firm owner? It never feels like there's enough margin in the business to be able to pull the trigger to go do these things that we want to do. And so, how can we build a framework to be able to approach some of these decisions? Kind of like to your point, every business owner is going to have their own unique circumstances. It's not about creating a boilerplate, solution that applies to everybody. But I think there are meaningful ways that we can build frameworks as entrepreneurs and as leaders of organizations, so that way we can make informed decisions that help drive the organization forward.
Several things is, and I think the foundations are the foundation. This is a lot of what I just heard, and it was spot on, is money is a big deal. And if you're stressed financially, it affects everything else. So you want to make sure that, again, maybe you have lines of credit, or you have family or friends or partners, or if you're going to do a private placement, which I've been involved in as well. And so it's like, what are you going to do to fund that growth? But before you fund the growth, and I know you asked financially, but before you put the financial, they go hand in hand. And you said it so well a few minutes ago, standard operating procedures. Do you have everything to where it can be duplicated and scaled? And are you very confident? Have you scaled a little bit? Do you know your market saturation level? Like, is there more room in the market? Do you have a unique selling proposition? Are people going to remember you? There's so many different things to do with that, but financially, you've got to have that in place. And I'm just going to use a for instance, Zach. This is when I first basically started out, I took over a company, and it was a family company. It was my wife's family. And long story made short, and I'm going to try to make it really short, but imagine having someone you care about, my mother-in-law, and I just loved her. What a great person. But she had cancer, and her insurance, she was uninsurable except for with this company. So I ended up buying the company because it was getting ready to collapse and I was going to grow it. Well, you know what? I didn't know my numbers. They didn't know the numbers. And what I ended up having to do is hire professionals, CPAs, I mean, really expensive ones, to come in, and because it was a manufacturing company, and figure out what we owed. And compared to what they told me, it was like a $300,000, how do I say it, more than they thought or told me.
Sure.
There was 300,000 more in debt. I was like, oh my goodness, now what do I do? Yeah. Well, by not planning in advance, it was like so crazy. The stress and the pressure was there. And it was like 7 years of no vacation. And I want you to hear that, 7 years, because it took everything I had to stabilize that company and grow it. And I didn't even know what I didn't know. And another time not having, so when I say this, when I work with someone, I look at the money, not even thinking about it, just starts coming natural. But when I first went into real estate investing, and you talked about that, I went out and I figured out I could find great deals with lots of equity in them. And so I went out and I did that, and I found tons of property. It's like, all right, we can flip these, we can save them, we can do, but I personally only had so much money that I could deal with. And it's like, I can do 3 projects, maybe, depending on how big they are. Well, that wasn't enough to just scale the way I wanted. So I found out very quickly I had to go get the money. So I stopped trying to scale, and I quit putting properties in contract. I went and I found funding. I went out and I found investors that had a lot of money. I mean, tons of money, to where I could scale the company now, because they're like, yeah, if you find a property that fits these criterias, I'm in. So again, if you don't have the sales in place, where you can't find them, doesn't work. If you don't have enough money to do the business, you're going to suffer. So it's looking, or if you don't have the people to handle the business, like I was mentioning with the one gentleman, it's like any one of these can crush you. And you've probably heard the saying, Zach, but I'm going to say it anyway, is you can choke a business or you can starve a business. Starving is you don't have enough business and you go out of business. Choking is you have too much business and you go out of business. So it's like finding that combo of how do I look at all the different dynamics. But I'm not sure if I answered, if I went off in a tangent. So
yeah, no, that's really good, and I think will be helpful for a lot of people as they think through. I don't know anybody that wants to sign up for 7 years of no vacations and just kind of nose to the grindstone. So hopefully, we can learn from some of those experiences. One of the challenges that I see with a lot of a small business or small organization leaders is this concept of uneven outgoing capital expenditures, I guess, is maybe the way to think about it. So it's like they're doing well, top line continues to grow, they get to a point where they need to add some additional capacity, and then the way that they add capacity is you have to add a full-time W-2. Generally speaking, you can add some part-time, but eventually you get to a point where you have to pull the trigger, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, here's where my margin was, and then once I add somebody, boom, now I'm underwater again. And so, how would you approach a conversation with a scaling firm owner who is doing really well? It feels like they're having to spend more and more time in the business as it continues to do well, and they're thinking about adding some additional capacity, but they know that adding that capacity might put them underwater for, let's say, a season. And then there's just a big question mark around, hey, am I going to continue to drive growth the way that we have in the past? How do you build a framework for making some of those decisions? And how do you also put into place, let's say, some strategies that give you different options? You mentioned line of credits as being one of those. So what are some of the tools that entrepreneurs can use to help maybe smooth out whatever that transitionary period might be?
Yeah, what a great question. My goodness, is We do hit those levels. And if you do bring people on, your cash flow goes down dramatically, especially if it's a key person. And you go, I don't even know if I can afford them. And so when you bring them on, how do you decide what do I do? Well, there's where you look, if I bring them on, can I fulfill even more with them? And then you say, will I be able to fulfill more? Like, will I really? I know I can now because they will up my capacity, but you have to make sure that you or someone on your team will actually go out and sell more or bring more business in. And if you can't do that, then you have to make that decision. Is it worth it for the quality of life or whatever? But we're talking about scaling. So as we do that, you have to look at how am I going to grow this and make sure that you have that, because it's going to be really tough. So lines of credit are great and family members are great, but here's a big mistake. People go out and let's say they use a family member, not a bank or an experienced investor, and they trust that person. They love that person. And all of a sudden they're investing and it's really, really good. But that person doesn't really know what the banks know. Like, let's look at your business plan. Let's look at your growth plans. Let's look at how are you going to sustain that? They're not asking the right questions. So they go out and now they've lost their family members' money. Yeah. So most people of integrity are going to say, I don't want to do that. And they don't do it intentionally. But again, how do you make that decision? You look ahead. You have to look down the road and say, can I bring in more revenue? And do I have the right people or myself to do that? And then also you have to look at your own cash reserves. If you are so tight that you can't really, you're all stressed out and you can't produce, then it's not going to work. Because, and we're talking financial now, but I'm just going to throw something else out there. Everything is internal and external. The external is the finances. The external are the standard operating procedures. The external is all the systems, all of that. The internal is the mindset and the belief. And if someone gets too stressed or too worried about, I don't have enough revenue, I don't have enough income, then quite frankly, they're not going to grow. They're going to, and if it gets too crazy, they're going to shut down. They're like, I don't need more chaos. And they don't even realize they're shutting themselves down. But I see it all the time. They're shutting down because they can't handle any more stress. They're like, I'm done. I'm over. So you have to make sure that you don't put yourself in that position. And again, I'm not talking from anything but experience here, because I've been there going, man, I'm so stressed. I don't know if I even want to keep doing this. I want to quit. Yeah. So you've got to make sure that you can, again, see how you're going to get out of the situation if you bring those people on. So look down the road. And that's why I can say most entrepreneurs don't take time to sit and think. They don't get quiet. They don't pray. And I'm a big prayer, but to go, should I or should I not? Because many times they get too caught up in the day-to-day and the stress of everything, so they don't seek wisdom from God or even just quiet time listening. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's really good. So Steve, next I would say, as we transition from thinking about some of the financials to, some of the, let's say, more operational side, let's say theoretically that someone has now taken these financial resources, they have started to build a team, they're bringing on employees. How do you manage, I now have a team that I'm responsible for, what does it look like? We've talked about, standard operating procedures. We talked about, policy. We've talked about delegating a little bit. So like, what does that look like from a, let's say, more tangible standpoint, actually going in and putting some of these things on? And before you answer, I also want to remind everybody, we're going to do a Q&A in the next couple of minutes as Steve and I wrap things up. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the in the comment box. That way we can make sure that we get to those afterwards.
Okay, well, Zach, with the more tangible, and those are just words, and we know that's like when we say standard operating procedures. I'm going to put some meat on those bones. So what does that mean? It's like when we bring on a new salesperson, we have like 20 things we have to do. And it's like a checklist. Make them an email, get them into, we use Google Drive, get them just on and on and on. Well, we have all those in writing. That's a standard operating procedure. But then also we record those. We do video recordings showing, because sometimes one will work better than the other, or some you need to see it in writing. So even little things like that you would think, well, I'm not hiring any salespeople right now, but 6 months from now, when you do, are you going to have to go backwards and go, did we forget 3 things and now it's hurt you? It's like, so every little thing, if you can put it in place, because here's another major thing to scale a company, grow a company, whatever you want to call it. You spend all this time, you get your team in place, everything's firing on all cylinders, you're growing, and then either you lose someone, it could be a tragedy, it could be they just left, better job, they have their own opportunity, who knows? It could be 100 things. But the reality is now, how do you replace them? And if you don't have the stuff in place, I've seen it so many times that people now are hurting and they're saying, what do I do? And it's like, and they try to take it on themselves. They go backwards. If you have it in place to where you can take any intelligent person and now you put them in place and they can watch the videos, they can read, it's been updated. Now you can scale and grow. You can't, even though I say people are the solution and people are the problem, you can't rely on people. And I rely on people. I love people, but you can't rely on them to grow, because anything could happen. So you have to make sure and just come at it from a standpoint, what if I lost a key employee? How can I actually recover from that and plan that in advance? So that's kind of the meat of the standard operating procedure portion of it, more so than the financial.
Yeah, that's good. Let's get a little bit more practical and maybe dive down another level. You talked about actually starting to record some of these standard operating procedures. I know that there are CRM tools, there are video recording tools that our firm uses. When does it make sense to start leveraging some of those tools? Is that like, hey, coming out of the gate, you need to be thinking about this? Is this as the team starts to grow or you hit a certain revenue mark? When does it make sense to start leveraging, let's say, technology to help the business get a little bit more organized? And then what have you seen, I guess, either in your businesses or other entrepreneurs that you work with use for anybody who out there is maybe still doing everything on an Excel spreadsheet? I have good news for you. It's like there are a lot better tools to stay organized and on top of things than just using an Excel spreadsheet. So, Steve, what are you seeing that's working for other entrepreneurs in terms of leveraging technology to create some of these things and stay on top of a lot of the tasks inside the business?
And great question, Zach. I think if someone's starting out as a solopreneur, or they have 35, 135 employees, it doesn't matter, CRM program you got to have. You have to have it, period. Day one. And if you don't have your CRM program, you're not building on a strong foundation. So that's for someone that doesn't know, client relationship management tool, but you can automate and do so much with that. Like, when are you going to call that person? As soon as you finish, you log your notes in it and you know exactly when to call them. You need to have that from day one. Don't try to do it on an Excel spreadsheet. If you can't afford, like you're a brand new entrepreneur and you can't afford something like, let's say, QuickBooks, there's Wave apps that you can go out and you can get for free. It's full-blown accounting software. It doesn't cost you a penny. You need to do that so you know your numbers. And so if you're not using technology from day one, start now. Invest the time, because again, this is your business. You need to grow. And by the way, they're transferable to any business. So we started using CRM programs 30 years ago, or at least 25 years ago. And it's been longer than that. So probably pretty close to 30 years ago, but
you're dating yourself now, Steve.
Yeah.
Most of us didn't even know there were CRM tools 30 years ago.
You know what? There weren't many. I can tell you the ones that were around, and we had to network our computers and we had to do all sorts of weird stuff you don't do nowadays. But anyway, it's crazy that when I sold one of our companies and I left, I was like, I can't function without a CRM program. I couldn't function just as a personal entrepreneur because I knew how efficient you can be. So you want to use technology and automate as much as everything. But again, there's a balance with everything. If you just go out and you automate, and you get everything in place like that, and you're doing it, but you don't have enough clients or you don't have the other things in place, that's not going to work either. So look at where you're at, but make it a goal, make it an objective, depending on where you're at on what next level you need to go to. Because you might have a CRM program, but your entire team isn't there. Or you might have QuickBooks, but you aren't using it properly, or whatever it may be. So there's technology out there now that makes it so easy.
Yeah, that's really good. As we kind of wrap things up and transition over to the questions and answer part of the discussion, I'll just kind of share for us what's worked really well. We are standard operating procedure fanatics. It's definitely something that we want to have in place at all times. And our team has constantly said, we want to grow our employees internally. We want them to have the opportunity for whatever they want their careers to look like. And so as the firm continues to grow, we want to make sure that each one of our team members is empowering the next person that's coming behind them. So that way everything doesn't just live, up in our heads. And if you're anything like me, I've probably forgotten it after like 2 or 3 days anyways, and I'm going to have to go figure out how to redo it anyways. And so it's better to slow down a little bit, to take the time and record some of that stuff. And so some of the technology that we use Loom for video recordings, which has been really helpful internally. So instead of writing a big, long technical email, or instead of, calling somebody up or scheduling a 30-minute meeting, we can do a quick 2 to 3 Loom video that will walk through, hey, here's this internal process, and we share that amongst our team. And since we have the license, we've also used it for clients because we do some more technical, type of work. And so sometimes it just kind of helps to prime the question. Somebody sends us an email and says, hey, I've got this technical question. And so we can do a quick video and send it over to them. We use a specific CRM to our industry, so I don't think that would be helpful for people. But we are in the process of building out Go High Level, which is a marketing, application. So we're finding that that's really helpful as we, continue to do more digital marketing. So those are a couple of the tools and resources that we're using. I also hear a lot of really positive feedback from entrepreneurs that are using Asana. I think, Steve, that you and your team use Asana. So for anything that's task management related, it seems like that's a really good tool. Does Asana have workflows? Do you know, Steve?
They do. Yep.
Yeah. So for anybody who's not familiar with workflows, it's basically if you have a reproducible process that you do over and over again that has a lot of steps that are involved, a lot of tasks. Instead of just doing one task, you trigger it, and then it has all these different tasks that are in a sequence, and it'll tag different people on your team. For example, let's say we bring on a new client and we want to send them a welcome to the family email. It'll tag whoever it is on the team that's responsible for for sending out that email. So it helps us stay on top of things, and also make sure that we have a reproducible way of making sure that all of our clients have a consistent experience across the board. So with that being said, I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. One of the questions, Steve, you mentioned, I guess what I heard were 2 different things, which was maybe it makes more sense to leverage your internal network of family and friends. Maybe it makes more sense to go to some sort of financial institution. One of the questions that I would have as you're thinking about scaling and maybe you need more capital is, how do you balance making the decision between, let's say, going to private investors, whether that's friends or family, or doing some sort of, other type of fundraising, compared to going to a financial institution? How do you approach that conversation in terms of knowing which route makes the most sense for your organization?
Well, sometimes going the route of, let's say, giving up ownership in your company, giving up some equity. If you're really tight financially and you go out and you borrow more money and you say, I don't know how quickly we're going to be able to pay this back, and we're going to take a lot of that money and have to pay back the loan, So we just borrowed it. Now we're taking that money and paying it back. That probably doesn't make sense because now you're going in the hole even more. It's like compounding it.
Yeah.
So you might want to give up equity, but if you give up equity, which I've done, and I've done it the right way and the wrong way. And at times I gave up controlling share of one of our companies and was actually asked to leave my own company.
Oh,
It's like,
wow.
that was crazy. It's like, wait a minute, I founded this, we grew it to high revenue. And then because I gave up controlling interest, they said, we also pay you a whole lot of money. We're going to ask you to go and we won't have the salary anymore. It's like, I understood it, but it stunk. So you have to be really careful with how much equity you give away and how little, but then you look at it and go, all right, maybe we should get a very low interest loan from a bank. And that might be better than borrowing money from family or friends. And you go, yep, we can repay it. So again, you have to look at the entire big picture to kind of decide.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Steve, really appreciate all the wisdom and the insights as, we've had a conversation around some of the challenges that come with growing an organization, arguably one of the best, problems to have in your business. These are very good problems that we want to solve. What does it look like for anybody who, wants to get into contact with you or learn a little bit more about some of the resources that you and your team have?
Well, they could reach out to me directly at steve@expectsuccessglobal.com. That's my direct email. And for everyone on your podcast, Zach, anyone that's listening, we just put this together as far as the offer goes. But if anyone wants the Ultimate Success course, quite frankly, they can go and get the Ultimate Success course for free. And it's a $200 program. It has 15 modules in it, and it's not just lightweight. But we sell it for $200, but anyone can go get that for free. If you'd like to book a consultation with me directly, I believe the link that you're showing right now will go directly to my calendar. I'd be happy to give a full-blown consultation, not just lightweight, again, figuring out how I can really help you. So feel free to book one if that would be of value.
Awesome. We'll definitely make sure that we send that out in an email to everybody who is part of the attendance today to make sure that they're taking advantage of that incredible resource. Really appreciate you jumping on and being a part of the conversation, Steve, as we wrap things up here. I just want to remind everybody that next month on Thursday, March the 6th at 4 o'clock Central Time, we're going to be talking about ways that you can leverage smart tax saving strategies, be more efficient with your tax savings. We'll have Cliff House, who's going to be on the call. He owns a bookkeeping and accounting firm, and so we're really excited to have him as part of our conversation. So really appreciate everybody being on today. Steve, once again, thank you so much for your time. Thanks so much. Hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, Zach.